Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll just give a few seconds for everyone to join. Thank you for joining us. This is our last webinar of the year, so we're really excited to have Kennedy join us for this one. So I'm going to go ahead and get the announcements started so everyone can still join. Hi, thank you for joining us for PowerFlex's webinar today, participating in demand response, boost energy resiliency, and earn additional revenue. I'm Emily Lau, Marketing and Communications Manager at PowerFlex and the host for today. Our speaker is Kennedy McGinnis, PowerFlex's valuation analyst. Just a little background on Kennedy. She joined the PowerFlex market commercialization team in July 2021 to support the development of new market strategies for behind-the-meter solar, storage, and electric vehicle charging. She graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with a BS in Environmental Science, MS in Information Science, and 3 years of environmental health research work with the UNC Institute for the Environment and Joint Graduate School of Energy and Environment. At PowerFlex, Kennedy facilitates the emergency load reduction program and other grid service efforts in the North American markets, working with the multidisciplinary team to advance the applications of PowerFlex's proprietary energy management system and adaptive load management software. This webinar will be recorded for PowerFlex's proprietary use, and we will make it available to participants afterwards. It'll run for about 30-ish minutes, and we'll leave time for questions as well. And the question function has been enabled for participants to submit their questions there throughout the entire presentation, and Kennedy will address those during the latter Q&A portion. Thanks, everyone, and without further ado, I'll hand it over to Kennedy.
All right. Good morning, everybody on the West Coast. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast, and to everybody in between. Happy Wednesday. Thanks for the introduction, Emily. My name is Kennedy McGinnis, and I am on PowerFlex's market commercialization team. And as Emily mentioned, I work on our grid service programs, which is inclusive of demand response. And that is our topic of today. So really excited to have this conversation, talk a little bit about using demand response programs to boost energy resiliency and also earn additional revenue for you, the end customer. So without further ado, like Emily said, let's go ahead and get started. Our agenda today will cover a few different items. First, I'm going to start with a company overview. Some of you may be familiar with PowerFlex, other of you may not be. So we're going to talk a little bit about PowerFlex, our mission, and the wider company of EDF Renewables. And then we'll dive into the definition of demand response. What is it and what does it mean for your business? And we'll talk about a few case studies, specifically in the Emergency Load Reduction Program, which is a demand response program in California. And then we'll spend a slide or two talking about the grid of tomorrow and how demand response enables our current grid to be smarter, cleaner, and more resilient. And then we'll wrap up with Q&As at the end. Feel free to send those questions you have during the presentation into the Q&A box or directly to Emily, and we'll spend a few minutes at the end going over those. All right, with that, I will get started. So, company overview. PowerFlex is a national provider of renewable energy infrastructure with a comprehensive suite of flexible turnkey solutions designed to transform any organization into a clean energy facility. So what you'll see at the bottom there is the technologies that we develop, install, and manage, anywhere from solar and storage to electric vehicle charging and even microgrid deployment. And we manage all of those with our proprietary energy management system, PowerFlex X. I'll talk a little bit in more detail about two products of the PowerFlex X platform today. The first being Cortex, which is our optimization engine. So it's our Cortex software that takes into account your tariff rate information, building load, things like solar production on site, and makes a plan for how we want to use our battery storage or manage electric vehicle chargers to work along with that load and maximize your savings and revenue. The other product that I'll speak a little bit about is Access, our client portal, and what that offers to you in terms of understanding your load in real time, whether that be for PV production, building load, electric vehicle charging load, etc. PowerFlex is a subsidiary of EDF Renewables North America, which is one of the largest renewable energy developers in North America, with over 20 gigawatts of wind, solar storage, and EV charging. And that's all across US, Canada, and Mexico. It's part of the wider EDF group, which has 70 years of experience of energy deployment. EDF Renewables North America started up about 35 years ago, and PowerFlex not too long after that. So EDF Renewables North America is a grid scale energy provider, but they really saw the value of distributed generation. So behind the meter solar, like rooftop and carport solar, and battery storage and EV charging. So they developed what we now know as PowerFlex. PowerFlex has over 360 megawatts of solar projects installed in North America, over 46 megawatt hours of on-site storage, so clean storage, and it's one of the nation's largest electric vehicle charging provider. And what's really special about PowerFlex is that it develops and manages all these types of technologies under one roof. So we're, a turnkey installer, developer, and asset manager of these types of technologies, and we can leverage our relationship with EDF's many years of experience in the renewable energy space to really optimize the solutions that we provide to our customers. Speaking of customers, these are a few of our clients that we work with. We have a really diverse range of clients, from Amazon to San Diego Zoo to LA Airport. Each trusts us with, to install projects efficiently and manage those assets in a way that maximizes their potential. All right, so getting into the bulk of today's conversation is demand response. Demand response is an incentive mechanism by which utilities pay customers to reduce energy when the grid nears max capacity. There's a couple reasons for that, and there's a couple strategies that we can talk about to actually participate in demand response. So the first is building curtailment, and the second is distributed energy resource dispatch. This is what we're going to focus on today. So basically, what a grid has a certain max capacity that it can manage at any given time. When that max capacity is getting reached, for example, in summer months when it's really hot and the grid has a lot of HVAC systems being turned on, a lot of energy being used by end customers like us, building owners, residents, home residents, there's a ton of demand getting pushed onto that grid, and it runs the risk of, on really hot days or really extreme weather events, runs the risk of rolling blackouts or other emergencies. So there's a couple ways that utilities can mitigate those risks. Like I said, the first is demand response. And the second may be turning on power plants called peaker plants. So a peaker plant could be a natural gas power plant that is only used in these kind of grid emergencies. But as you probably know, power plants, like natural gas plants, do emit a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, and is kind of a dirtier and actually more expensive alternative to demand response for these utilities. Because of that high cost, both financially and with greenhouse gas emissions, to turning on peaker plants in response to grid stress, utilities are now starting to turn more to demand response programs, which are programs that engage the end customer. So let's go back to those two response strategies: building curtailment and distributed energy resource dispatch. The utility will send a signal out on these days when there are, signals of high stress on the grid, potential risk for rolling blackouts, and give the customer the option to either reduce load on site, that might be by turning off lights, changing the settings on their HVACs, or if the customer has distributed energy resources on site, or DERs, they can actually engage those resources in participating in the demand response program. So when you're working with PowerFlex, that looks like engaging solar paired storage or EV chargers to offset building load. And in some demand response programs, even export energy from those batteries back into the grid. I wanted to just show you an example of this in real life. On the graph on the right side, you'll see this is the California grid this summer. There was a major heat wave that came through California in September over Labor Day weekend in the week following. And there were several event days called for various demand response programs managed by the California utilities. So to name a few, there was the critical peak pricing demand response program, which is a tariff-based demand response program. There was the emergency load reduction program, which is a voluntary paid for performance demand response program. And there was even an unpaid voluntary program called Flex Alerts. So if you're a resident of California, you might remember this time this summer because the state actually distributed a signal to everyone's cell phone that said, hey, go to your building, your house, your office building, whatever it may be, and let's work together to get our loads curtailed so that we can avoid any risk of blackouts in California. So what you're seeing on this graph is, like I said, a 24-hour period of one of those event days in September and the total demand being asked of on the grid. I want to focus in on this purple line or the bottom line. That is our net demand on the California grid, or building load minus renewables such as solar energy, excuse me. So what you'll see here is in this box, the peak period is when there is a potential peak of that daily demand. It actually reaches over 45,000 megawatt hours of demand that day, which is an immense amount of energy and really what was causing the risk that day in California. But because of those demand response programs that we had in place and those signals that were distributed out to customers and energy managers like PowerFlex, California was able to reduce the demand on the grid by 2,000 megawatts, which is a really significant reduction. It's the equivalent of about, completely powering down about 1.5 million homes. Now, that load reduction was spread across many different buildings and houses, office buildings alike. But just to give you a sense of how much power that is, it's about 1.5 million homes, which is a huge reduction. And it was successful in avoiding blackouts that day. So this is just proof that demand response programs are, effective in reducing stress on the grid. And on top of that, they engage the end customer and give you an opportunity to earn additional revenue because a lot of this reduction was paid back out to the customer. And they're also a clean alternative, like I said, to those peaker plants, which are typically a little bit dirtier or higher cost to the utility. So PowerFlex sees the demand response cycle occurring in three key phases. The first is that signal that I talked about. So the utility, as it moves towards max capacity, it will send a signal either day ahead or day of to PowerFlex or to any participant in demand response programs that has been enrolled with them. And in some cases, they may send out a text message. I think that situation that we were in California this year was really unique, but typically they'll send either an email, text to participants, or even an API message to energy management systems. And then the next phase is energy managers like PowerFlex will distribute that signal to your distributed energy resources, meaning solar powered storage, and in our case, adaptive load managed EV chargers. So if you're unfamiliar with adaptive load management, this is PowerFlex's proprietary electric vehicle load management software. It enables not only enables us to balance load between multiple vehicles charging at the same time, but it allows us to receive signals like demand response signals and respond to those with the demand response strategy that we've come up with prior to the event. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in one of our case studies, but it ultimately leads to step 3 of the demand response cycle, which is the response itself. We have our batteries and our EV chargers now reducing load on site, or even in some cases exporting energy back into the grid and making that grid a stronger, more resilient, grid itself for whatever grid it is that's at risk. I mentioned this at the top of the presentation, but this is all managed by Cortex, which is the optimization engine within the PowerFlex X platform. What is so great about doing, participating in demand response with Cortex is that it's hands-off. It doesn't require you to go to your building and turn off the lights manually and adjust your HVAC settings and then readjust them when the peak period is over, or when the event response period is over. It does it all automatically and behind the scenes. So it's completely hands-off. We control it remotely. And it also is factoring in your tariff rate schedule and on top of this. So not only is it taking into account the, your load, your PV generation, and your demand response signal itself, but it's taking into account what does your energy tariff rate schedule look at that time? What is the cost of energy at other times of the day that we also need to keep in mind when we think about a demand response strategy on a true emergency event day? And on top of this, Cortex manages these assets 24/7. So, and it has a systems of alerts and reporting that can make sure that everything is working effectively and successfully in that demand response strategy. So there are plenty of demand response programs in North American market that we could talk about today. To list a few others outside of California, we're going to dive into one in California, but there's Connected Solutions and the Commercial System Relief Program in the Northeast markets. And there's a few others that we operate in Ontario and Canada, but one that I wanted to focus in on today, just because we have limited time, is the Emergency Load Reduction Program. This is a 5-year pilot program that's administered by the 3 California utilities to pay participants $2,000 per megawatt hour in voluntary load reductions. To give a little context to that number, we typically are purchasing energy in California at the commercial scale for over an eighth of that value. So this is a really high value load reduction program, and there's no penalties associated with the ELRP for non-performance. All the rules for different demand response programs are different, but we see a lot of value in this ELRP program, which is what I'll call it, the Emergency Load Reduction Program. And it's something that, we've seen a lot of our customers be very interested in as well. The pilot was initiated back in 2021 through an emergency proclamation when the California state government was realizing there was a lot of extreme weather events happening in California, and we needed a way to fight those emergency events and the grid strain that was brought on by those. It's a day ahead or day of signal that comes through in the ELRP program, and it's typically triggered, like I said, by emergency events such as heat waves that cause grid strain on the electric grid, cause energy prices to soar for the utilities. Events can typically be called in the summer months, and they're always going to happen between 4 to 9 p.m., which is our peak period in California. One thing that is really special about the ELRP is that it allows stationary batteries and even bidirectional chargers to not only offset building load, which is typical of the demand response program, but we can actually export energy back into the grid from those batteries. So that's not something that's always allowed, especially in California. And most places, it's not typically allowed to be exporting energy back directly into the grid, but that rule is waived in this program so that we can be using that extra power that we have to generate exports for grid resiliency. Okay, so I kind of gave an overview of the emergency load reduction program. We're going to go into a couple case studies that we did this past summer in that program next. The first is EDF Innovation Drive. Innovation Drive is a campus owned by EDF Renewables North America. And at that site this summer, we co-optimized solar, battery storage, and electric vehicle charging for grid dispatch during 9 emergency load reduction events that were called during that massive heat wave in September. So I've listed those assets that we were controlling again. Just one more time, there's the utility rate schedule that we're tracking, the demand response signal itself, building load, battery capacity, load, solar generation, and electric vehicle charging load. All those things are being managed by Cortex. And then we use that information to optimize a strategy that we think is optimal for the campus itself. This is a screenshot from Access, which, like I said one time before, is our client portal. I know there's a lot going on in this slide, especially if you haven't seen something like it before, but this is a load curve that's managing all those assets that I listed on the slide ahead, or the slide that we just reviewed. So what you're looking at here is a 24-hour period of one day in September of that week-long ELRP event. There's solar, building load, electric vehicle load, battery capacity, and battery state of charge being represented on this graph. And this is our load here. what I want to focus in on is this gray box, which is the peak period. That's 4 to 9 p.m. And there was an ELRP event period that was called on that day from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. So what you're seeing right here is we have in that yellow curve is our solar being generated on site. All of that solar energy is being, stored in the battery that's also on site. And then it's used to not only create energy export in the ELRP event period, but also offset building load in the rest of the peak period. So that's what I mean by we're balancing tariff rate schedules and the demand response signal. We're able to offset our building load at that time and then also have export back into the grid during the ELRP event window, which is that shaded red area under the graph. This is what we think is so cool about demand response programs like the ELRP. We're enabling grid export from 100% clean solar, these renewable sources that otherwise we may not have the opportunity to export back into the grid. And on top of that, we're able to earn this site additional ELRP revenue. So just again, this is a screenshot from Access, the client portal. All this information is being tracked in real time. And so we can see in real time the synergies between different assets that you have. We're co-optimizing our energy storage and have the ability to co-optimize our energy storage and electric vehicle chargers on site. And there's a lot of really great reporting that comes out of this client portal. The other case study that I'll touch on is a site that we participated this summer as well, or managed for the ELRP this summer as well, the University of California at San Diego. This site, we were managing actually EV chargers only. So about 90 level 2 electric vehicle chargers across 3 garages on this site. We manage them with the adaptive load management technology, which is that smart software solution that allows us to balance energy across a wide variety of chargers and vehicles that are plugged into those chargers. So what we did with UCSD is teamed up in the spring before the ELRP season began and came up with our strategy for how we would actually go about limiting power to those chargers if an emergency event were to occur. And we also wanted to keep in mind that we still want to be able to deliver energy to drivers that need it in those emergency situations, but at a rate that might not be, as high as it would be in a different time of day or when an ELRP event signal was not called. So we came up with a strategy in the spring that said, okay, if an ELRP event comes around, we'll go ahead and limit our power to, the decided limit that we had put on it. So that when the emergency events did come around, we had that strategy ready to go, built into our load management system, and could actually go ahead and perform to that strategy. And what we also were able to do is, after the event period is over, we could take a look, review the data, see how those sites performed, and make any adjustments that we wanted to following that. So that wraps up our case studies. The final slide that I wanted to review is the grid of tomorrow. So I just reviewed a lot of information about demand response, specifically programs like the Emergency Load Reduction Program that call on customers during these emergency event days, and showed you the value of participating distributed assets like solar paired storage and electric vehicle chargers into those programs. PowerFlex, along with many other end-use customers in California, participated and had a real impact in California and in the other markets outside of California as well. But which is, just proves that demand response program is going to be a successful way towards resiliency as our grids become more stressed. With an increased number of weather events happening due to a change in climate and the continued electrification of buildings and transportation, grid strain is going to remain an issue. But this just shows us that we can rely on management systems such as Cortex to be able to balance that grid need with distributed assets. I wanted to touch on one final note that we thought was interesting going into, after this summer and going into summers to come, where we see, grid strain continuing to be a problem. There's going to be a case for bidirectional chargers, and I wanted to define what a bidirectional charger is and also how it might be used in a program like the Emergency Load Reduction Program or other demand response programs. So there are about to be millions of electric vehicles on the road, and each of those vehicles comes equipped with a battery. So those batteries are going to be driving around, and oftentimes during the peak periods of various markets, they're going to just be parked, and we could be using the energy that's stored in that capacity to send energy back into the grid. So how we would go about doing that is with a bidirectional charger. Bidirectional charger allows not only a vehicle to charge from the grid, but also send that energy, as its name would suggest, back into either a building to offset building load or into the grid itself. So just one stat that I wanted to show you here is, if we have one 60 kilowatt hour electric vehicle battery, which is probably pretty typical size right now for EV batteries, although they will get bigger in years to come, you could charge that battery for about $10. Again, it's going to depend on where you're located. If you're charging at a public fast charger site, it might be more expensive than that, but you could charge it for about $10. And then if you had access to a bidirectional charger, you can actually dispatch that full battery that you've charged, say, in the middle of the day when there's lots of solar on the grid. Peak period comes around and you can charge that back, send that energy back into the grid in emergency event days. In the context of the emergency load reduction program, that would have $120 worth of value. And so if you participated in the 30 ELRP hours, which is about the number of hours that we had this past summer, that value really stacks on top of itself. So just something that I wanted to point out, that there's bidirectional chargers that may have use cases in the years to come in demand response programs. They're being built and tested and used today, and it's kind of an exciting path forward that PowerFlex is eager to track and follow. And if you have questions about bidirectional chargers, or you think you may have a use case, I just invite you to reach out to PowerFlex. We'd be more than happy to talk to you about that. All right. We'll go into a series of questions now. If you have any, Emily may have some, and I will be happy to answer them.
Yeah, thanks, Kennedy. Thanks for walking us through that. It's really helpful, and for giving us some background context, what we have done in the past, and also what we're looking forward to in the future with new technologies like bidirectional charging. So we do have some questions. Thank you for submitting them. Feel free to continue to do so. The first question we have is, how do you know if my site is eligible?
Yes, that's a really good question. So like I said, there are a lot of different demand response programs in different markets. My suggestion to you would be to reach out to PowerFlex. We can work with you to first understand whether there is a program in your area, and then following that, understand whether or not your batteries or whatever assets you have on site are eligible for that program. There are some programs come with a lot of eligibility requirements, others do not, but we have an expert team working to understand what those eligibility requirements are. And once we find that you have a site that is eligible for a program, we can work with you to come up with a strategy for that demand response program.
Sounds great. Our next question is, what kind of distributed energy resources are best for demand response?
I would say in demand response's current state, solar power storage really is going to be your strongest asset for distributed energy resource demand response. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One is, like I explained, we can automate a lot of these response strategies with our Cortex optimizer. So it's completely hands-off, doesn't require you to go curtail your building load at your location. It's all completely automated. And I say solar power storage because that is really a resilient and clean solution to demand response and grid resiliency. So I mentioned at the end of this presentation that there might be a case for bidirectional in the future too. That's starting to be tested. But right now, solar power storage is really strong use case for this. And I think in the future that will be expanded to electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging.
Great. I think we have time for like 2-ish more questions. So the next one is, besides demand response programs, are there other revenue streams for customers and site owners who have behind the meter solar storage and EV chargers?
Yeah, there are plenty of opportunities for a utility bill savings, which is really why a great reason to install battery storage and solar on your site. There are, we participate in a couple of different response strategies to utility tariffs, including demand response. So I mentioned a couple of times in this presentation, the peak period. Peak period changes in different markets, but it typically comes with higher cost of energy and higher cost of demand charges. So we can use batteries and smart charging enabled electric vehicle chargers to basically reduce our energy that we experience at a site during the peak period. That's one way to generate savings at your site. The other ways to generate revenue are programs like demand response, participating in those sites that actually will pay you to reduce your load. And then if you are a public electric vehicle host, if you're operating a site that has public access to electric vehicles, you actually have an opportunity to generate revenue through driver fees. So just like someone going to a gas station to pay for gas, drivers might come to your location to pay for an electricity or electric charge, and a portion of that driver fee will go to covering the cost of energy, but there's also opportunity for revenue on top of that.
Thank you, Kennedy. We've actually come up to the half-hour mark, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much for answering all those questions and for this wonderful presentation. And thank you all to our attendees for joining and submitting your questions. If you have further questions, we'd be happy to answer that. Please contact us at sales@powerflex.com or connect with us via our website. We're really happy to, again, answer more of your questions, talk about a specific site, whether it's about demand response or any other offer that we have here at PowerFlex. Given that this is our last webinar of the year, we would like to wish you and yours happy and healthy holidays. And we would love to connect with you next year, as we will have a wonderful roster of speakers all ready for you for our next webinar series next year. So thank you all for joining us, and hope you have a great, wonderful rest of the week. Thank you. And thank you, Kennedy.
Yeah, you're welcome. Please feel free. If you have additional questions, reach out to us. We're happy to answer them. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a happy holidays.
Thanks. Bye.